Okay, thank you everyone. I'm Joël Cariolle, I'm a researcher at FERDI. That's a pleasure for me to moderate this really nice session with a very nice panel. So thank you all for accepting and for being here. That's a real pleasure to have you. We have a remarkable panel made of researchers, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and we'll try to address the very important question of digital public infrastructure for the poor, opportunities and challenge, because digital technologies are often presented like a silver bullet to struggle against poverty, but as it has been discussed before in many sessions, there are a lot of conditions for people to benefit from the diffusion of digital technologies. And this is even more critical when it deals about digital public infrastructure. So because digital public infrastructure is supposed to provide access to public service to a population that is usually underserved by public service. Just to give you a small idea of the constraints faced by poor people in a low-income country, including African countries. In Africa, for example, only 29% of roads are paved. 1 of 5 children in age to go to primary school actually go to primary school. And less than half of the population have access to basic health service. And by reducing information and transaction costs, the digital public infrastructure is supposed to provide access, the access of a range of public service to this population. So we'll try to discuss the condition for this. But maybe before giving the floor to the panel, I will just start by presenting them briefly and then let them presenting themselves more extensively when they'll take the floor. So we have Jenny Aker, who is a leading researcher in the research community, Digital for Development community. She's professor at Cornell University, and she makes us the pleasure to participate from the US, from Boston, I guess, to this session. So thanks a lot for being here digitally. We have Naledi Magowe, who comes from Gaborone, Botswana. She's an entrepreneur and she founded Brastorne, which is a digital platform providing digital agricultural service to rural communities in southern and central Africa. We have Mélanie Keita, who is a Franco-Congolese entrepreneur who founded Melanin Kapital, who provide climate and green financial service to small and medium enterprises in Africa. We have also Elodie Gauthier, who is a researcher at Orange, and she's working on linguistic model and voice interactive interface, linguistic interface that allow people to speak, to interact with local language with public system, public infrastructure. And finally, we have David Manser, who is a senior officer at the International Telecommunication Union, and is promoting open source operating system for public infrastructure and for public administration in developing countries. So before giving you the floor, I will start by giving you some definition of the digital public infrastructure, because actually for me that's not very clear what is a digital public infrastructure in comparison to a non-digital public infrastructure. And I'm not sure this definition will really help, but it will help actually to define some characteristics that are desirable, that can be achieved when developing, when expanding an infrastructure that provides public service through digital means. So the World Bank definition is the following. DPI is an approach to digitalization focused on creating foundational digital building blocks designed for the public benefit by providing essential digital functions at society scale that can be reused across sectors. DPIs enable public and private service providers to build on these systems, innovate, and roll out new services more quickly and efficiently. Common systems built as DPIs include digital identity, electronic signatures, digital payments, and data sharing. So this is the World Bank definition. And I also take the GDN definition because it is one of the even the main organizer of this conference, so it would be too bad to not mentioning it. So DPI refers to the digitization of systems and frameworks that enable the timely delivery of public services and functions, thereby reducing the needs for physical human intervention. This includes digital identity, payment system, data exchange framework, and other technologies that facilitate efficient, accessible, and transparent public services. So what can be analyzed, synthesized from this definition is that first, the digital infrastructure is a general purpose infrastructure providing service to the public at scale for large public mainly through digital means. So it is a general purpose infrastructure that relies on digital technology to provide public services, more specifically, digital identity, digital payment, and data sharing systems. Digital infrastructure can also be governed by public and private actors. So it is not necessarily a public actor that will govern this infrastructure. And also, this infrastructure will allow to provide in a timely, efficient, effective, and scalable way public services. So this is very important. And in this way, it is supposed to be inclusive. The question whether it is complementary or substitutable to the human infrastructure is a real question. When you see the GDN definition, it refers to the reduced need for physical human intervention. Maybe we'll see that this is not necessarily the case, but maybe to start and to see the global picture, I will give the floor to Jenny. So Jenny, as I said, has an extensive experience in research and field work in regards to digital technologies in low-income countries, more specifically in Africa and also Central America. And so she will give us an idea of the condition in which digital public infrastructure can reach the poor, can help reducing poverty, providing the poor access to public services, what are the factors of success, and also maybe what are the determinants or the obstacles that make them sometimes fail in their intended purpose. So thanks a lot, Jenny. I give you the floor.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I very much wish I were there. I apologize. But I'm glad I could join digitally, which shows you the potential that this could do, because 25 years ago, when I started working in this area, this wasn't possible. I thought I would just maybe take a few minutes to kind of set things up more generally before we listen to the expertise and the experience of our very esteemed panel. And just to set the stage, I mean, I think we all know that over the course of the past 25 years, DPI has really taken off, not just worldwide, but in some of the poorest countries in the world. If you just focus on one type of DPI, which was mobile phone coverage, that's expanded rapidly in Africa over the past 25 years. There were almost non-existent networks in sub-Saharan Africa at the turn of the century, with the exception of Morocco and Egypt and South Africa, to a point where now over 80% of the population is covered by a mobile phone network. And it's not just that infrastructure, but this has really coincided with a huge increase in mobile phone adoption and usage. You know, we know from the data that more households in low-income countries own a mobile phone than they have access to electricity or clean water. And about half of the world's kind of 2.3 billion subscriptions are really mainly in low-income countries. The exciting part of that has been that it's no longer just kind of internet or broadband or kind of mobile phone infrastructure, but on the backbone of that DPI, of the mobile phone infrastructure, we've really seen the rollout of new types of services, such as digital financial services, which has increased from no digital financial services, at least via the mobile phone in 2008, where now we have well over 200 deployments worldwide. So this growth in DPI really, I think, raises three important questions that Joël had talked about, which is A, what is the potential, especially for low-income countries and low-income populations? B, what are the challenges to scale? And C, you know, as we do think about scale, what are the real impacts upon people's lives? You know, who are people who are benefiting? Who are people who are not being reached? And what does that mean for our future strategy? And I think what Joël had talked about a little bit is that what we know is that in many low-income countries for lower-income populations, the potential impacts of digital public infrastructure are really massive. And the reason for that is what I said previously, is that traditionally, those who are lower income, living in lower income countries, have had more limited access to infrastructure. That can be power or roads, or way back in the day, that was landlines. They have limited access to public goods, such as schools and health centers, and limited access to financial services. And in those contexts where information is difficult to access or process, or health centers are far away, or you can't get a loan, DPI is important because it serves as a communication device, as a data collection or dissemination device, and as a financial services device, as a bank in your pocket. It does so because it just reduces costs, hand down, right? So it reduces the cost of searching for and replicating information, transporting that information, collecting and storing that information, and targeting individuals in ways that we've never seen before. And I think the way to think about that and really make that concrete is that 30 years ago, when I started working in Niger, where now I do a lot of work, a majority of farmers and traders in low-income areas had to travel physically to a market to find out what price it was if they wanted to sell their good. And once they arrived at the market, they looked at the price, they compared that with their cost, and they made a decision whether they sold that day or whether they returned home and waited until another market took place later that week. If the price wasn't good enough, then they had to wait, right? And this is a huge cost if you think about the fact that individuals in many areas in sub-Saharan Africa have only one harvest per year. So getting that price and getting the price right had huge implications for their welfare for the rest of the year. Then when mobile phones came in, traders and farmers could and now can call around instantaneously, find out the best price for their markets, reduce their search costs. This has huge welfare implications because you are no longer dependent upon physically traveling, which has a cost, but also waiting until you arrive to figure out what the price actually is. You can think about that in the same way if you're looking at kind of emergency information. We've recently seen with hurricanes that are taking place in Jamaica, in Cuba, rather than waiting and learning about that information via a radio, you can look it up online or receive an instantaneous SMS or a call. So this very simple, powerful reduction in communication costs is really important for low-income populations to get access to key information to make decisions about agriculture, health, the environment, education, but also communicate with friends or family members. And that's very important in places where insurance and credit markets are missing, which is the case in many still rural low-income populations. And with the growth of 3G, 4G, 5G, many of this information is available not just locally, but also regionally and globally. Secondly, with the advent of mobile money, now we've seen that millions of unbanked individuals, which is about 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, have the opportunity to send and receive money transfers, and in some cases to save on their mobile device with interest or to borrow via digital lending. Third, with this big data that happens via mobile money or mobile phones, it's a way for policymakers in the private sector potentially target individuals rather than do kind of physical in-person poverty mapping. And then finally, in a place where kind of almost 1 billion people worldwide have no form of legal ID, 90% of whom live in low-income countries, now DPI reduces the cost to developing and implementing digital IDs, and we've really seen that take off in places such as India, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Togo, if I'm just focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot of stuff going on, but we've also seen some challenges as well to meeting that potential and scaling. And I think that's because of 3 reasons. And I would love to hear what the audience thinks and what our panel members think. But the first one is still that there's this infrastructure gap. So we've seen these huge increases in digital infrastructure worldwide, but there's still huge heterogeneity across and within countries that disproportionately affects the poor. When I talked previously about this growth in mobile phone coverage, 80% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa. In many areas, that's still mainly 3G, and in some cases, just 2G. And that is in part due to uneven access in submarine cables or terrestrial deployment, which profoundly affects internet access. This infrastructure gap is then kind of overlaid by a usage gap. The idea that if they build it, they will come doesn't necessarily hold true. For many of these services, there's a gap between coverage, access, and usage. There's a very clear divide between urban and rural, educational level, and gender. even though we've seen that that is diminished with kind of basic mobile phone coverage, that gap still exists for internet coverage and other types of things that require kind of higher bandwidth. And those gaps, what we've seen according to the data and kind of quantitative and qualitative discussions, are mainly because of costs, either smartphones or usage, literacy. If you are not literate, it's very difficult to get access to many of these internet or these apps. Technological skills, including the language of service, and broader socioeconomic factors. That's also overlaid with the utility of the service that's being provided. We might provide a service that gives information, but is it information on the markets where farmers find that it's very useful? And with the advent of AI, and the fact that we have this infrastructure and this usage gap, this risks even further compounding the digital divide. And then I think the third gap that's important to keep in mind that Joël mentioned is what I'm going to call a complementary infrastructure gap. That's mean either a human infrastructure or otherwise. And what I mean by that is that, if a household receives cash via mobile money and wants to get that cash, but there's no agent available or the agent is an hour away, then mobile money is really less useful. Or if a farmer finds out that there's a higher price for a good in that market, but they arrive in the market and they have no bargaining power, it doesn't help them to get that higher price. Or if a firm gets access via a digital loan, but they don't have the capacity to run its business, or they can't necessarily find workers, then this limits kind of the utility of that mobile money. So I'll just end with maybe an example or a quick example to fix ideas. One of my favorite is, mobile money and digital financial services. We know that financial exclusion is high. And still, individuals in many countries either receive their cash transfers via cash or they receive their wages via cash. And when mobile money was introduced in Kenya in 2008, there was a lot of promise, and it really took off in many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And I mentioned previously this idea of well over 200 deployments. And what's really the research has shown is that in places where mobile money has been rolled out, it's really effective. It allows households to get access to remittances when they need it. They can smooth their consumption in the face of shocks, which are numerous, and this can reduce poverty. And on the public sector side, it really reduces the cost of sending out transfers, which then helps beneficiaries, and it really helps them to improve their welfare. So this infrastructure that was created allowed kind of a new type of digital financial infrastructure to be rolled out. And then this had benefits both on the private side and on the public side. But if you look at the data, again, in sub-Saharan Africa, there's huge differences in kind of adoption and usage. This ranges from well over 90% in Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda to 5% in Niger and 40% in Benin. And people, even if they are registered, might not necessarily use it in a continuous basis, right? They might use it once or twice to get a payment, but not on a regular basis. And the question really is why? If it's really beneficial on the public and private sector side, and people seem to appreciate it, why is it not necessarily taking off in certain areas? And I get back to those three gaps that we mentioned. Infrastructure, we know that kind of coverage probably exists and the technology exists because of these deployments, but the issue of interoperability is still kind of a constraint in certain countries. Secondly, in terms of usage, many individuals, lower income individuals, are using mobile money on feature phones, either because of unreliable internet coverage, the cost of these phones, digital literacy and how they access these apps, understanding how mobile money works, and the use case, because there's these other kind of competing types of money transfer services. And then the third one is really this idea of complementary infrastructure that, if mobile money exists, but people cannot use digital money in order to pay at local shops or otherwise, and an agent is not there, then people don't necessarily want to use it. I'll just stop here. I could talk for hours about this and go into a little bit of some things of positive use cases in education and health, but I don't want to go over my time, so I just want to leave the floor to other people. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Jenny. That was perfect. And just to maybe to draw a lesson from what you said is that the human infrastructure was a critical factor of success of mobile money system, which are one of the few examples of concrete digital public infrastructure that rolled out in sub-Saharan Africa, which differ a lot from the definition of digital public infrastructure that we have from India, for example, through Aadhaar, which is a much more digitalized infrastructure and when human interaction are much less decisive. But also there is maybe a critical factor that is an impediment to the upgrading of the digital public infrastructure in the region is digital identification. Because we are at this stage, we see a large diffusion of first generation digital financial services, but to upgrade and to reach a greater diffusion of second generation digital financial services like digital credit and insurance product and so on. But this also extends to mobile health, to other type of public services. The question of identification is also critical. So from your experience, because you also run a chair at GPAL on digital identification, maybe you can shortly give us an idea of how big is this obstacle for African population to upgrade their digital public infrastructure, especially in the financial sector?
I mean, I think in general, I mean, as we've seen and as we know, every country has its own use case here. We've seen certain countries that are taking off quite quickly and other countries that are a little bit slower. You know, certain countries that already had an extensive ID system and they're upgrading it. So it's easier to upgrade it, whereas other countries haven't had an extensive ID system. So simultaneously, you're trying to implement an ID system while you're also trying to implement a digital ID system, which is a constraint. I think the biggest thing that we found, and I am not, you know, a digital ID expert, but you know, from the public sector side is that, you know, what system do you use? Who do you kind of outsource the system to? How much faith and trust do you put in kind of the providers of that system? That is a huge question. And how is that done nationally? That's the first question. The second question is that how do you decide to roll it out? Do you roll it out immediately nationally, or do you roll it out with certain populations first? Because this needs to be verified on the ground. Nothing can just be done digitally if an existing ID system doesn't exist. And that requires a lot of time and effort. And then the third one, if you go back to this human component, I think is really important that we've seen in a few countries that kind of digital IDs have started off and then they've stopped. And the reason for that is because people were unwilling to take it up. And the question is, if people are unwilling to take it up and use it, then it doesn't necessarily become useful. And again, it becomes this idea of a use case, you know, just rolling out a system. If individuals are not convinced of its utility, the fact that this is going to help them get access to public services, this could help them kind of get benefits for their school children. It could potentially give them access to some type of loan. At the same time, it could also then put you on the registry. So now you have to pay taxes. All of these things are really important to keep in mind, that it's not just how you roll it out or what is the system, but how you roll it out, how this is actually kind of you know, explained, and kind of what is the use case, and do people actually view benefits from this, at the same time also viewing these costs, because it's not necessarily going to be costless. And I think there's a lot of experience from Aadhaar that we've seen that, you know, at the first stages what happened, and then at later stages when it become required in order for you to access some of these governmental services, people started pulling back a little bit and kind of questioning whether or not this is going to be useful. So
thanks a lot. That was really clear and really interesting. So we talk about mobile money as a good illustration of digital public infrastructure that has been widely rolled out in low-income context. But in other sectors, it is much digital. The example of digital public infrastructure are much scarcer. But here we are lucky because we have Naledi Magowe, who has developed, expanded a digital platform in providing digital agricultural services to rural population, a platform that scaled up and now delivering these services in Botswana, in Central Africa, in Guinea. And so I will give you the floor to just tell us more about this experience, how this idea came, how this idea of providing service through low-tech technologies, internet-based service to people who have not smartphone and are not connected to the internet network, but who can access internet-based agricultural information, how what's the story of Brastorne and your personal also implication in this project?
Hi, everyone. Guess what? Hi, everyone. I'm Naledi, as he's mentioned. I'm the co-founder of Brastorne. And at Brastorne, we like to say what we do is simple. We connect the unconnected. We enable rural poor populations in Africa to access information, markets, low-cost communication, and basically the internet without smartphones or data bundles, using simple and familiar technologies such as USSD, SMS, IVR, and voice. We've done this in partnership with mobile network operators such as Orange and MTN. And we've done this in 5 countries. So that's Botswana, DRC, Cameroon, Guinea, and Zambia. And we have impacted over 5 million lives. So the conversation that we're having today is really important to me because I started my journey based on my personal experiences. Home village is a big part of who we are in Botswana. We go back to our home villages during holidays. Our families still live there. Our parents have houses in the home village, even though we live in the cities, our grandparents. So it was very personal in that I was able to see the digital divide and disparities when we started the business. My biggest use case in our business is in agriculture, and my family is into farming, and I could see how back in the villages, because there's no or there's limited connectivity, there's a lack of access to relevant and timely information that enables decision making, or timely decision making rather, which then affects the rest of your agricultural activities. And so we decided to build a use case around that, and it has done quite well. We've been able to scale it across the countries, and my contribution today is really kind of unlocking the why our platform worked, and kind of linking to Jeannie's contribution or her question about why there's a usage gap. And so what we've been able to really do quite successfully is co-creating with the communities that we are building for. We had to really, really be in tune and in alignment with the contextual realities. So for instance, we realized that about 70% of the mobile phone users use feature phones. And the minute you leave a city and let's say about 20 minutes drive out of town, you're already, dropping down to 3G and then going to 2G. So even if you do have a smartphone, it's going to be only useful for taking pictures at that point, right? So you're not going to be able to interact meaningfully in a digital economy. And so firstly, then you have to build or create your solutions with those realities in mind. We realized that it's really unfortunate that though people do have mobile devices, they don't have the right type of devices, which kind of leave them, quite excluded in a huge way. And so we also learned that other barriers as well that come into play become things like literacy and language as well. Those are huge barriers. So that kind of led to us realizing that we need to accommodate local languages. We need to accommodate voice capability for those who are illiterate, who can't read and write. And then we also then came to the realization as we kept on building and reiterating, and our solution kept on gaining momentum, that eventually we're faced with the reality that smartphones and data bundles are going to become more accessible and more affordable. However, our user base is going to be transitioning onto entry-level smartphones. So they're not going to jump onto the very fancy smartphones. Entry-level smartphones also have their own challenges because now we have storage and memory issues. We have battery life issues, pre-installed apps that our users won't even know how to remove those, and they become very skeptical about trying new apps. And so in building a digital experience, we initially wanted to build an app, but we had to very quickly learn that we need to perhaps pivot to a web app instead, something that doesn't need to be downloaded, something that's light, that's, can work on 2G, for example. And so I think the core element of what I'm trying to maybe, or the point that I'm trying to drive home here is really being contextually aware when we're designing solutions and DPI and ensuring that we co-create with the communities that we're serving.
Thanks a lot, Naledi. I have a question that comes to my mind. We can see that even already scaled up technologies and systems like yours that prove effectiveness and that show social value, because many people from many very remote areas use them and are willing to pay for this service. What is the hardest obstacle to maintain activity? I have in mind, for example, the DRC context, where there has been a tax reform which changed the game for your operation there. And this echoes an already point discussed in a previous session about the high taxation of telecom operators and how it impedes job creation in Africa. Yes, I'm looking at you. He's an expert on this. And can you tell us more, a little bit shortly, in a few minutes, what happened in DRC and how it constrained your activity when this tax reform happened in DRC?
Yeah, so affordability is a huge part of a huge driver in accessing technologies such as ours. So when we collaborate with mobile network operators, we're also very conscious about affordability and price. And normally what then happens is they're able to kind of give us advice to make sure that the way that we price is sensible and it doesn't really have a huge impact on our end users' wallet or our farmers' wallet. Unfortunately, in the DRC, the government then imposed a tax on the mobile network operators, which they then pushed to the end user, which is the people that we're serving. So these are people that already have low incomes. They already, are struggling to afford, the basics, and now you're making things even worse for them. So that was what was basically happening. And this led to a lot of users not being able to afford the subscription anymore. It hurt our revenues. It also hurt the mobile network operators' revenues so much that eventually they were able to advocate to the government and they were able to lift the tax. But unfortunately, we had lost a lot of our users, and we have a lot of users that are subscribed that we decided not to kick off the platform. So they're still using the platform, but they're essentially using it for free. So you can see the way that taxation can affect, businesses at that level.
Yes, this is a really good illustration of the importance of the policy environment and the regulatory environments, and also on the accessibility constraints, which has a financial dimension. But as we already mentioned before, also a linguistic dimension. And this is the right time maybe to switch the language. Donc, à partir de maintenant, je vais m'exprimer en français et je reviendrai à l'anglais plus tard. Ce qui me permet d'en venir au travail d'Elodie Gauthier, donc, qui est chercheuse à Orange et qui a travaillé sur ces systèmes d'interaction vocaux en langue vernaculaire, et notamment en langue vernaculaire africaine. Donc, je pense que cet aspect est critique. Ce n'est pas seulement une option dans un système, peut-être cela doit constituer le cœur même de ces systèmes, cette capacité à pouvoir s'adresser à un maximum de personnes dans un continent où il y a une fragmentation linguistique importante, notamment dans certains pays. Et avec peut-être maintenant les technologies actuelles, cette contrainte est en train d'être levée, et grâce au travail que tu fais. Est-ce que tu peux nous en dire plus sur l'origine de ce travail, ton sujet de recherche, comment cette idée est venue à Orange et comment ça a été développé, quelles ont été un peu les contraintes techniques, systémiques liées au développement de ces systèmes d'interaction vocaux en langue locale? Merci.
Bonjour à tous. C'est ma première fois dans un micro, alors si vous m'entendez pas bien, levez la main. Non, bon, ça va. Donc oui, pour moi, vous allez écouter mon discours à travers des écouteurs. Je suis plus à l'aise avec le français, désolée du coup. C'est peut-être pour ça que je travaille autant sur l'inclusivité linguistique d'ailleurs. c'est important de pouvoir s'exprimer dans sa langue maternelle sur des sujets, je pense, aussi complexes et importants. Donc, en effet, je travaille pour le centre de recherche d'Orange. Je travaille pour le centre de recherche d'Orange. Et oui, d'accord. Merci. Je suis spécialisée dans le traitement automatique de la parole, notamment appliqué aux langues africaines. Alors, les langues africaines, c'est large, hein. L'Afrique, c'est tout un continent. C'est 54 pays, 2000 langues parlées, par 1 milliard de locuteurs, même un peu plus. Donc, on parle vraiment ici de diversité, de complexité linguistique. C'est assez facile. Enfin, en fait, on s'en rend pas trop compte, mais quand on développe des systèmes d'interaction vocale, en tout cas, quand on veut s'adresser à la machine de façon tout à fait naturelle, on veut le faire par la voix, on veut le faire par la parole, donc sa langue maternelle. Mais en fait, ça implique une très grande complexité au niveau de l'implémentation pour qu'au final, un algorithme, une machine puisse comprendre sa langue maternelle. Et, quand j'ai commencé à travailler pour les langues africaines, c'était pendant ma thèse. Le but, c'était de créer, alors c'était il y a presque une dizaine d'années maintenant, le but, c'était de créer des outils automatiques pour les linguistes de terrain. Donc, c'est des spécialistes qui sont là pour décrire et documenter des langues qui parfois sont encore inconnues aujourd'hui. Et en fait, eux, quand ils vont sur le terrain et qu'ils interviewent des personnes pour faire émerger des concepts linguistiques, pour comprendre comment est structurée la langue, ils doivent ensuite transcrire la totalité de leurs interviews à la main. Donc c'est un travail très long, très coûteux. Et donc le but, c'était de leur fournir des outils automatiques de transcription, typiquement, pour leur faire gagner du temps. Et donc j'ai travaillé avec des linguistes de terrain qui étaient spécialisés dans des langues africaines, notamment le Wolof, qui est parlé au Sénégal. Et je les ai suivis sur leur terrain. Et en fait, en réfléchissant à ces questions, à cette époque-là, il n'existait absolument pas d'outils de transcription automatique pour ces langues-là. Du coup, il n'y avait aucune ressource pour construire ces langues. Donc, il a fallu réfléchir à des méthodes de collecte, d'annotation de ces données pour pouvoir construire ce genre de modèle. Donc là, je me suis rendu compte que c'était un travail vraiment très difficile parce que quand on veut construire des outils de reconnaissance automatique de la parole, il faut comprendre des voix diverses. Donc, il y a des questions de genre, de représentation, de l'individu dans les machines. Et donc, il y a des questions d'accent aussi. Donc, il y a tout ça qui est à prendre en compte quand on fait une collecte de données pour créer des outils de transcription automatique. Donc, j'ai commencé à construire des ressources et à apprendre le métier, spécialement pour le Wolof d'abord. Et avec d'autres collègues qui étaient financés par le même projet, on a construit ensemble des ressources aussi pour le Swahili, l'Amharique, le Fongbe, par exemple. Et on a été les premiers à proposer ces ressources pour construire des outils de transcription automatique open source. À l'époque, on était très peu à travailler dessus, on est encore très peu. Mais ce qu'on peut voir, c'est qu'en 10 ans, il y a un intérêt énorme maintenant pour les technologies vocales et que les ressources qu'on a créées à l'époque sont énormément utilisés aujourd'hui et qu'en fait, ça n'a pas vraiment évolué. Aujourd'hui, c'est quasiment les seuls pour ces langues-là qui sont encore accessibles en open source et avec lesquels les gens peuvent eux-mêmes créer leur propre système. Donc après ma thèse, j'ai été embauchée par Orange, qui s'intéressait au développement d'outils, enfin au développement de technologies langagières pour la zone Afrique et Moyen-Orient dans laquelle on est implanté. Et donc, on a commencé notamment à travailler sur le développement d'un voicebot en Wolof. Donc, ça a commencé en 2020 à peu près. En fait, il faut savoir qu'à ce temps-là, il n'y a pas si longtemps, 5 ans, il n'y avait aucun voicebot disponible dans les langues africaines. Donc, dans un voicebot, il y a énormément de modèles à apprendre, de la détection de la parole jusqu'à la synthèse vocale. Il y a au moins 5 modèles. Et chacun de ces modèles, ils doivent être appris avec des données de haute qualité et notamment des données annotées. Donc, on parle de transcription de la parole, on parle de reconnaissance de la parole, mais on a besoin de texte. Et en fait, il se trouve que, notamment pour le Wolof, mais c'est le cas pour la majorité des langues africaines, c'est des langues à tradition orale et du coup, elles ne sont pas présentes sur Internet. Elles sont utilisées que pour interagir dans la vie de tous les jours. Enfin, elles ne sont pas écrites. Il y a très peu d'écrits. Quand il y a de la littérature, elle est peu numérisée. Et donc, on n'a aucune donnée pour apprendre les modèles. Donc, c'est un très gros frein. Au Sénégal, tout est en français. Sauf qu'il n'y a que 25% de la population qui est capable de comprendre et de lire le français. 90% de la population parle Wolof. Donc, Orange a décidé d'être un des premiers à proposer des technologies en langue locale et notamment un voicebot qui serait capable d'interagir en Wolof. Donc, c'était un projet de recherche. Hein, le but, c'était de créer une preuve de concept. Donc, on a répondu, il a fallu définir un cas d'usage. On a travaillé en collaboration avec nos collègues d'Orange au Sénégal. Et on a choisi, il faut commencer petit. Donc, on a choisi de répondre aux questions de nos clients sur le programme de fidélité mobile que proposait Orange. C'est un travail de longue haleine. Ça a duré 3 ans, malgré tout, parce qu'il a fallu tout faire from scratch. De la collecte des données à la réalisation des scénarios d'interaction qui n'existaient pas, jusqu'au nettoyage des données, à l'apprentissage des modèles et au déploiement de cette preuve de concept qui a pu aussi être testée sur le terrain avec des locuteurs de Wolof. Ça a été assez bien accepté. Les gens étaient contents de pouvoir interagir avec leur langue maternelle. Et pour ça, on peut dire que c'était un succès. Après, ça avait été déployé sur Facebook et les gens ne croient pas trop en Facebook Messenger au Sénégal. Et donc, on a ensuite continué à développer ça sur WhatsApp. Donc, le canal de communication est aussi très important. Et aussi, ce que je voulais dire, c'était que la majorité aussi de ces technologies, aujourd'hui, elles sont développées par des entreprises, enfin les grandes entreprises, les grands acteurs du numérique américain et chinois. Donc, ça pose des problèmes de gouvernance de la donnée et de sécurité et des questions sur la protection des données et de la vie privée. C'est aussi pourquoi Orange a voulu développer son propre voice bot pour ses clients. Donc, comme je le disais, la difficulté principale, c'est qu'il faut bénéficier, pour pouvoir apprendre des modèles justes, éthiques, il faut des données annotées, il faut des données équilibrées en genre, il faut que les données, pour faire des systèmes de reconnaissance de la parole, soient nourries de tous les sons d'une langue. Donc, c'est un travail, vraiment, c'est un travail coûteux et complexe. Un des verrous aussi, c'est, comme je le disais, comme ce sont des langues à tradition orale, elles ne sont pas apprises à l'école. Et trouver des annotateurs capables d'écrire avec les standards des langues, quand les règles orthographiques existent, c'est un travail vraiment très difficile, très long et coûteux. Donc, ce sont aussi des choses à réfléchir et à prendre en compte. La dernière chose que je voudrais adresser, c'est que c'est la diversité, justement, la richesse des langues qui sont parlées sur le continent. Donc, quand on parle du Sénégal, par exemple, on pense souvent au Wolof, qui est la langue majoritairement parlée. Mais en fait, il y a plus de 30 langues qui sont parlées sur ce territoire. Donc, quels sont les choix linguistiques à faire? Ça aussi, c'est des questions qui sont importantes pour l'éthique, pour l'accès aux services. Et aussi, comme il y a un fort contact des langues dans ces pays, les personnes vont mélanger très naturellement des langues. Et ça, aujourd'hui, les modèles ne savent pas le faire. Donc ça, c'est des challenges auxquels nous, en recherche, on est en train de réfléchir et de répondre. Voilà.
That was fascinating. Thanks a lot for this intervention. The lesson that we can draw from this is that language is not neutral and it is a vector of discrimination towards populations that do not speak the language of the public infrastructure. Especially the colonial languages, because generally this digital public infrastructure required the knowledge of French, English, Portuguese, Spanish. And this is not necessarily the case in the large part of the population. So that was really interesting. And also considering the fact that thanks to what you do, maybe this is the first step to create a known corpus of information in Africa that will help build an African AI. And this is a core element of the future digital public infrastructure in Africa, according to me. And thanks a lot for this. Now I will switch to Mélanie. Another obstacle to access to essential service is lack of finance, lack of access to capital. And I will ask the reverse, directly reversed question: how digital public infrastructure can help unlocking the barrier that many entrepreneurs face when they want to access capital and they want to scale up their activity?
Thanks, Joël, and thanks so much for having me. And of course, thank you all of you for being with us in the last session of the day. We see the passion you all have for digital public infrastructure, so thanks for that. Indeed, like access to capital has been my obsession since I can even remember. And like Naledi, it's based on my history. I come from a family where I have 25 uncles and aunties on my dad's side, obviously not my French side. And we all had entrepreneurs in our family, mostly in the agricultural space. And my dad being the only one who went to Europe, we were sending a lot of money back home. So I used to tell him, like, why are not our aunties and uncles just going to a bank and getting a credits like here in France? And that was the question that shaped my entire career. And basically trying to understand why no one is financing SMEs and what would it take to finance SMEs in Africa. I worked in different impact fund, government, development banking, used all of the big words of blended finance and credits and so on. And I realized a few things, that when you actually go on the ground, it's much more difficult than it looks, and digital public infrastructure plays a huge role. So essentially, when I started, there is a clear observation. 60 to 80% of SMEs don't get access to finance in Africa, depending on the statistics or the country you're looking at, right? Most of them are in agriculture, which makes a lot of sense, that we should be able to make money and make profit by financing those companies. But what is happening? My job when I started was to understand, how can I give you money when you are a dairy farmer? Yes, you again, sorry. I decided you're just in front of me. How can I give you money and make sure that you give me my money plus my interest? I need to trust that you're able to do that. How do I build that trust? In the Western side of things, the trust is built first by understanding who you are. Do you exist? Is your name actually true? So in a non-digital world, I would go to an archive and a registry, and I would look for your name and find it, then make sure that you actually exist because it matches your ID. In a digital world, then we have a government registry, which we don't across all the 54 markets. So that's the first issue. In a better world, I would get a government registry, and it could be linked directly to my platform, so that I put your name as you've put your profile, and automatically I know that this matches a registry. Currently, with Melanin Capital, we're able to do that only in Kenya and Nigeria, out of the 8 markets we're working in. So that's a first barrier. The second, when I want to give you money, I want to make sure you can pay me back. So I want to check if you've taken money before and didn't pay back, or if you actually are able to make money out of your accounts. So I need a registry, which usually is provided by the credit bureau, where I can type your name and see that you have taken a loan before, or you've not taken a loan, but basically you don't owe anyone any money. In most of the African countries, those credit bureaus cover only 10 to 15% of the population. So that's another barrier, right? Then in a more digital world, I would love to know across all the different loans you're taking, even the rent you are buying, if you have been in areas of anything. But we are not yet there. And finally, I need to know, where do I send you the money? Can I be able to transfer money very easily from an account? Can I have an interoperable, oh la la, what kind of English word is that? Interoperable payment system where we are able to transfer money at lower cost, which in Kenya, and I've heard it during that conference, we do have M-Pesa that allows that. We have PesaLink that allows that. But in other markets, it's very, very difficult. So as you can see, like, part of my job already is really linked to digital public infrastructure. So it won't unlock everything, but just having those ones work can make a big difference. So there are solutions, right, that have been built, that are working, but I challenge you researchers, because that's your work, not mine. Mine is to drive profits. Yours is to say how badly I do it. Some solutions that we already have on the continent that are basically privately driven. So in Kenya, for instance, we have eCitizen, which is the registry of the government for IDs, and it has been built by a private company, right? So now what's the consequence of it is that all our private data from ID, registries of companies, visas, entries, are also harvested by a private company, and they take a percentage of every revenue that is happening through this platform, including when you pay for a visa, when I register a company, when I do a company stamp. but it works perfectly and it can be linked to our platform. So that's the first that's a first example with public-private partnership. Second example, M-Pesa, Safaricom, right? Safaricom is owned significantly by the government, but it's also owned by Vodafone, right? Consequence, a lot of our payment transfers are quite expensive for the poor. And when you take, even if it's 5 cents or 10 cents out of every transaction, when I only make $1 or $2 a day, that's a lot of money that is going out of my pocket. So that's another consequence. But M-Pesa works perfectly. It works really, really well. Then a last innovation that we are now looking at, even at Melanin Capital, is blockchain. Our blockchain, I'm not going to try to go into it, but in a few sentences, now we have Tether, the big company that is building USDT, so the digitized dollar, is coming to Africa massively, starting with Somalia, South Sudan, Kenya, like all the countries where payment could be a bit difficult and expensive. They're coming in to provide the solutions. Tether is valued at $500 billion this past month. So it's a huge private company that now African governments are welcoming and implementing at scale. So my question is, are we ready essentially to provide or to offer that digital public infrastructure through the private sector? And if not, are we having enough confidence in our government to be as efficient and as innovative as those solutions? So clearly, those are the steps that we have taken. What would be the positive outlook of that is that, of course, we would be improving access to credit, which would support the farmers mostly of Naledi, for instance, but we would also improve access to capital, which would deepen innovations like Naledi's to be able to scale across markets. And we could even give access to even more type of capital like carbon credits, which is the new big instruments that we are using currently to finance access to renewable electricity, to electric transportation, and to even access to water. So providing even more infrastructure to underserved populations using this new instrument. But it would require much more transparency of information and maybe imperfect partnership with the private sector.
Thanks a lot. That was really, really interesting. And by showing that the lack of digital public infrastructure is a critical barrier to unlock access to finance, but also that the ownership of this infrastructure is critical because it can create some dependencies. You talk about transparency. You talk about a lot of keywords, actually, that will bring me to David Manser, who works at ITU on open source operating system for the digital public infrastructure, more specifically. His approach addresses question of interoperability, cost, transparency, sovereignty. So all these elements are critical for expanding the DPI and to reach the poorest population. So, David, why does open source matter for DPI in practical terms? And you are promoting the open source ecosystem enabler and OSPO initiative. Can you tell us more about this initiative from the ITU that you are promoting, and from some experience that you had in Kenya, I guess?
I'll try.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for this introduction. So I'm David Manser. I'm working for the International Telecommunication Union, which is one of the United Nations specialized agencies that is actually taking care of information and communication technologies. We are more known about telecom than anything else, but actually our mandate is quite broad, and we are essentially supporting member states in their digital transformation and making sure that connectivity is ubiquitous, so everyone has access to internet. So as part of this work, I'm contributing to these activities as part of the Development Bureau, more specifically in charge of open source and digital public infrastructure. And so I have a portfolio of activities, a few of which Joël mentioned, that are related to really pushing and supporting the member states in further embracing open source technologies, open content, open source artificial intelligence, open standards in their digital public services developments. You may be aware that the United Nations is a complex system. We are driven by the so-called Global Digital Compact, which is some sort of a Bible document where we have all of our great directions and ambitions. And you must know that open source, DPI, digital public goods is really front and central to our global digital compact. So we are, as UN agencies, trying to do as much as we can to push the governments towards these directions. Before getting into more details, I would like to come back to the actual definitions, because one word indeed was not said in the two definitions you extracted from the World Bank and the other one, maybe the J20 one. I think we are losing a little bit the focus of what initially motivated digital public infrastructure, and the actual word openness is being a little lost at the price of scalability, interoperability, and I must say, because I'm into it and I'm working at the UN and interacting with a number of agencies and governments, that we can feel there is a struggle in the backstage around this very notion. And the reason is that we started really pushing with quite some strength the so-called digital public goods, which are meant to be in, I would say, a mid or long-term future. Everything we know of in terms of public goods being based on open source software, open content, open source artificial intelligence, and everything open. But to get there, it's not going to be easy, because some countries already have their systems in place. Others are not ready, policy-wise, to switch to the open source world. And overall, there are still a number of fears associated with opening. People usually think about open source as a poor version of closed sources, or a more expensive system because it's more complicated. You have to handle a community and have people contribute to it, and something that is overall not sustainable. And over time, open source is, the actual perception of open source is progressively shifting, because and essentially because, and thanks to artificial intelligence, because we are becoming more and more aware of the risks related with digital sovereignty, that we need to actually have systems that are more open, transparent, inclusive, secure. And so these are intrinsic qualities of open source. So open source is something that people will realize more and more is actually the solution for public goods, for whichever digital public goods. But it's going to take some time. And in the meantime, what happened is that some others have tried to define public goods in a more pragmatic way, and coping with the actual legacy of information systems, legacy of policies, and lack of maturity in some areas. And so they've come up with the concept of digital public infrastructure. Where it differs from digital public goods is that it's more about every building blocks of a digital society that serves masses and that can scale efficiently and serve all the people at the same time. And so this has gained traction. It's really becoming now the one buzzword throughout the UN in our member states. So every countries want to go for a DPI. And so we are trying to push them in that direction. But I must say that we must be careful, and we must make clear that we gotta develop further the openness of these systems. And so I'm trying, as far as I'm concerned, to push and to make sure that every single definitions of DPIs do not lose this open word, because that is the very first scaffolding of this global digital transformation, is to start simple. So, okay, we cannot go open source from next day on because it's too complicated. It's a shift of paradigm, and it requires a lot more investment and efforts. Yes. So let's start with DPI. So we should go for systems that are secure, inclusive, that are abiding to people's rights, that do no harm, and so let's start with open standards, open specifications, and that's exactly what digital public infrastructures are about. And so at ITU, we started 5 years ago a very interesting initiative, which is called GovStack, which is actually one of the ancestors of this whole move. And that has produced a number of open specifications for basic building blocks of a digital society. We actually have more than a dozen now. And that's really useful for member states that are interested in getting started in procuring for getting those DPIs in place. And so this is done, this is formalized, this is accessible for free, and it's been done in a consensus-based manner with our member states. So this is an interesting initiative that I do encourage our participants to have a look at. It's called GovStack. And GovStack also provides us a sandbox, which is even more interesting because you can download that sandbox and start playing with actual DPIs. As we know of today, a few were in terms of grand categories defined. We know that as part of the DPIs, we should find digital identity, digital payment, data management, registries. So all this, and digital wallet is one important as well. So GovStack is providing a number of these examples that are really useful for countries that are starting from scratch or looking to really accelerate their DPI developments. Now, having said that, in going a little beyond, we are also developing capacity building, because what we see in many countries we are dealing with is that they are lacking the skills, and they need to build their capacity locally to then go for DPIs and more open systems. So we've got another initiative that started 2 years ago, which is called the Open Source Ecosystem Enabler, which you mentioned, OSE in short. Which is really, not actually just ITU, it's ITU together with the UN Development Program and the funding of the European Commission. And so basically we've selected 2 pilot countries, and we are supporting them in developing what we call I would say the supplementary or complementary scaffoldings of this digital transformation. And so we are helping them coming up with a national program office for open source, and this is called in open source community terms an OSPO, Open Source Program Office. It's something we've seen as a trend developing first in the private sector. So most companies that were utilizing or developing open source, they started centralizing their resources, their skills, their developers actually into those program offices, and this has become something. Now we see more and more countries that are creating their own to facilitate open source development. So OSE, the Open Source Ecosystem Enabler, is this other initiative that's trying to build capacity ahead and supporting the countries in developing their own program office. And Kenya is one of our 2 pilot countries. So I'm quite frequently flying to Kenya and working with the Ministry of ICT and Digital Economy, the Ministry of the Interior, because we have some ambitions to also co-develop something with Kenya that will become part of the e-citizen application. So I was amazed to hear about it. So this is yet another initiative that I think is really pioneering something, and as we were meant to only have 2 pilot countries but received so many requests from others, we decided to open an affiliate program. So we've got about 25 countries that are following up that will receive further support in the future to also get started with their open source program office. And one last I would like to mention, and that relates to also former works carried out in terms of foreign and neglected or underrepresented languages. We are trying to help a number of countries getting started with artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence in particular. This is something we've explored as part of our open source considerations, and from interactions with a number of countries, we received repeatedly requests to get guidance, support on how to move forward with artificial intelligence. So we carried out, so we've opened a track at AI for Good, which is our main forum to discuss artificial intelligence about 2 years ago. And by discussing with a number of experts and concrete examples, we could get a concrete glimpse on the actual state of the art and very interesting technical orientations to gear towards something that is not too expensive for countries with low resources, but that is still useful for what they want to do. And so basically we've come up with, and that took us a number of meetings and hackathons and everything. I'm making a long story short, but eventually we've come up with an international multi-stakeholder working group with more than 50 people contributing, 15 organizations, including a number of sister agencies at the UN. And this thing is becoming a reference implementation. It's called Genie, Genie.ai. That stands for Global Empowerment and Intelligence and Equity, for Intelligence and Equity. Genie.ai, that's a truly free and open source generative artificial intelligence that is based on open source LLMs combined with retrieval augmented generation. And the whole point there is to say that we don't need necessarily a massive ChatGPT-like generative AI to serve the purpose of our member states, but rather something simple they can get started with and fine-tune to their own needs in a given sector. And so that is what we are presently doing. So developing smaller artificial intelligence that can be fine-tuned to a very specific public sector. So Genie is one of the other initiatives I'm in charge of. We are actually working with Kenya, Lesotho, El Salvador, and we have a massive worldwide hackathon ongoing, which is called Gen AI for Good. That if you're interested, I do encourage you to have a look. You will easily find it. It's something we are doing in collaboration with IEEE Humanitarian Technologies. And basically, we have convinced 3 countries that are in need for these technologies, together with 3 specialized UN agencies, to open a hackathon over 3 months, 3 full months, for people to come contribute to one specific sustainable development goal in the country. So we are working with the Gambia, Bangladesh, and Lesotho in particular, in health, climate, and agriculture. So I hope it was not too much of information, but I'm happy to answer to any further questions.
Thanks a lot for emphasizing how important is open source system, especially to reach the poor, to reach digital sovereignty, and to run effective, proper digital public infrastructure. We are running quite a lot of out of time. We are very sorry about that. We started late, but we are even later. Maybe there is some question in the public. Yes. I can do that too.
A very good evening to one and all present. This has been big congratulations, because this has been a riveting, mind-blowing discussion. It's amazing to, I'm a DPI researcher myself, I'm from India, and it is amazing to hear from, a policymaker, practitioners, private entrepreneurs, academicians. It has been riveting, just to say it very briefly. My question is, about the sustainability, about the financial sustainability of DPI initiatives. So just for small context, right now, the international momentum, the philanthropic aid coming into DPI sector is quite high, and we're really running towards its peak. But over the long term, especially what David spoke about with open source coming into play, how do we see the financial sustainability of DPI initiatives from the long-term lens, especially for the poor? Because with the poor, we can't really think about pay-as-you-go model with DPI. So from different perspectives, how do we see sustainability? Does it sit at crossroads with open source, or do they go hand in hand? Thank you.
Yeah, I have one. Should I go ahead? Yeah, I'm Pradeep. I teach economics at JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. I work on education and development, particularly in the technology, connecting that with the technology. So my question was for Jenny, but anyway, the panel can also give. We call it as digital public infrastructure, but actually it is digital private infrastructure, because largely it is in the hand of private. That's all, if you will agree. In that context, many users are being exploited, I would say. Uber is exploiting. I'm not taking the name as such, but there are many. When I go in Delhi, Uber drivers and all, they say their stories very clearly, how they are being exploited. Amazon, there are all these platforms that is being expanding for gig economy and all that. So they are exploiting a lot to the public. So how are you going to address this? Why at some point we are seeing the importance of this digital public infrastructure, but we have completely handed it to the market, this new liberal agenda. So how are you going to address this? This is an important question for me. And same thing happens in education. Also education, many digital infrastructure comes and they exploit a lot to the parents and students. So how are you addressing this? This is an important concern I found as a researcher.
There is one question over there. Yes.
Hello, everyone. My question is directed towards Naledi because I have seen your initiative about with Brastorne, and I've seen how much impact it has created in Africa. And this might surprise a lot of people because we have been talking about how India has advanced in terms of DPI. But I come from a remote village in India where we still don't have access to 2G or 3G internet sometimes, especially in the monsoon. And although I can see a signal tower right across our house from my rooftop, I'm not able to access proper internet when it's very necessary. And the reason I have got to know that it's because of my location being in the middle of a forest, my house's location, and there the forest department or the Ministry of Forest Affairs, they're not allowed to let the people send strong network signals to places like mine. So I know you talked a lot about the financial aspects of overcoming these kind of challenges in remote areas, and I'm wondering how you can overcome challenges in terms of environmental or other aspects where the government is not able to let you have other alternatives or any kind of supports to overcome these challenges.
Thanks a lot. Maybe we stop with the question because we are very short on time. The first question, I missed it because I was, but it was for you, I guess.
It was related to sustainability.
Yes.
I can perhaps give a few words on this. So as far as open source is concerned in the context of DPI, the main issue on when you go open source is not only to set up the right structural organization as part of your country or ministry or organization, and that is about setting up an open source program office, having a team, etc., etc. But then also you have to build and manage a community around your product. So, and that's the whole difficulty, and that's something you have to do over time. So you got to keep the momentum and motivate your community to support you in the development. So it's got to be something done with your local ecosystem, and you've got to think about the innovative idea that you have and how it is win-win for the actual contributors to join the initiative. But this is something that is not new. Open source nowadays is everywhere, even in closed sources, and actually it's much more developed by the private sector than the public sector, because the private sector outsources or offloads problematics or things it doesn't want to focus on to a community of open source developers, and that helps the business to stay focused on what's really at stake. So it's not new. You gotta build a community, manage the community. And what we know is more difficult about sustainability in open source is when it comes to neglected open source software stacks of interest that millions are using that are no longer maintained, and for which you need to find a means to ensure they will be maintained over time. And we've had a number of examples of this over the recent past. And so, as far as the UN are concerned, we are trying to motivate the creation of an international fund for neglected open source software stacks, where eventually will make it possible to have a registry of these, so they are well identified, and then a means to fund maintainers over time so they don't die. But that is something key that we are indeed working on. Additionally to this, and I think you may be interested in knowing about it, is that the United Nations are becoming extremely serious about open source. This is something that was not 10 years ago so serious, so within the organization, even though it's well aligned with the organization values and mission. And so since 2 years, we have a large community of practice where all of the UN bodies are contributing. It's called Open Source United. And we've created the first ever common policy framework for the UN system. So now all of the UN agencies, bodies are aligning with this common policy framework. And this comes together with a number of tools. We have a software repository, a software catalog, and capacity building program. And what's interesting about this is that we are going to use this whenever it comes to supporting our member states in terms of open source development. So the development I mentioned, for example, Genie.ai is going to be one of the first major contribution of ITU and its community to this repository. So that is an important step forward.
Thank you. I just wanted to take the second question on the digital private infrastructure, which I think is very, very good question, but very amusing as well for me, because I agree. Like I was talking to Professor Alwin here, I was actually telling him the exact same thing. Like at least in our markets, and I'm glad you mentioned Uber, like even as we use Uber to like build a credit score on Uber drivers so that we can finance for them electric vehicles and like different assets that they need. So to play the devil advocates, like, would you actually give the confidence in your government to build Uber or to build the public infrastructure that we need to be able to move? Like we are a bit constrained also if we want to move forward and to advance socio-economic development to rely on the private sector. And I think the big issue here is that we are doing it without any breaks. And like especially development banks and development agencies are doing it without any breaks. There's been a shift in development that we've seen after the independence, where like a lot of development banks stopped financing governments to do like development projects and started investing in private sector. Like it came with all the Proparco and the like DG agencies that you have within the development banks. And it has its advantages, right? Because then we are able to provide subsidies to the private sector, and then they're able to put in place innovations that advance the development. But it also comes to a cost, right? Like because once it's been launched with subsidies and taxpayers' money, then it creates profits for a private entity. And then they also are free to change prices, and they're free to change all of this, right? So I think, of course, the answer is always gray and in the middle, and no one wants to agree on it, but you do need a collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, and you need to regulate heavily the private sector, which we never managed to do at the end, right? And for me, where I want to also play the devil advocate for the private sector is that because of a lack of a government intervention, you see that the private sector is actually going above and beyond what they do in the West. Like in electric transportation, we are forced to put the charging stations, the buses, the electric buses, and the system where people are booking their seats in the bus. Like we financed a company called Basigo, and they had to build the entire value chain because we don't have the digital public infrastructure that is done by the government. So yes, it's a problem. It's just that I think the problem is that we're not pragmatic, realistic, and honest about it. That we've been privatizing most of our infrastructure, both digital and not digital, by the way, and that it will have consequences in the future that if we don't regulate and put laws now will be devastating for or create a bigger divide. So yeah. Sorry, don't have a solution, but at least I pretty much agree.
Can I jump in and comment a bit? Hello, my name is Margus Mägi. I'm from Knowledge Hub Digital. Later on, I invite you to hear me speaking, but I just wanted to comment about, because this discussion started from terminology. And I think it's important to highlight, at least I have this perspective, that if there is a shop next to a street, then the shop itself is not an infrastructure, the street is. So what I want to say here, that Uber is not an infrastructure, it is just a platform, because itself it's not like everybody can choose something else that it is intended for. But I would say that, for example, data exchange layers, if Uber would provide services also for traffic waybills, would enable selling public transport tickets and everything else which is with the public transport, and then we could consider this as an infrastructure. So I have simplified for myself the terminology of DPI and DPG, that really rightfully DPG as digital public good is a product which is an open source. I don't know, is it for document management? Is it for whatever? There are endless amount of open source products out there. And any product can become an infrastructure when this product is used horizontally, like in a sense that the same product is used by various actors in a digital society, and they use this product to provide certain goods or something like this, and they are becoming interconnected. So when this interoperability comes forward, then certain public goods can become infrastructure. Before that, they are just products or digital public goods, as some say. So I just wanted to highlight this, that Uber is, at least in my perspective, not so ever any kind of a infrastructure rather than just a simple platform as such. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this comment. The clock is running. No, it's okay. Maybe you want to respond to the okay, please.
Thank you for that question. I appreciate you sharing your personal experience with that. It's a tricky one, right? Because there's really only so much you can do to influence what governments decide to do. But in our experience, though it's a different case or different use case, where there was we collaborated with the COVID task force a couple of years ago when COVID had just come up, and we developed a contact tracing app, which was also available on USSD. And so one of the biggest challenges was affordability of data for people to be able to use the contact tracing app. It was a huge barrier, and what we had to do was we had to lobby and advocate for this platform to be zero rated. So I think maybe in response to what you're asking, one of the biggest or effective ways, if possible, is advocating and having somebody who represents your locality, who understands your challenges, can go to the right people and pretty much highlight the issues and the challenges that are being faced, so that they can understand the need, for example, like you mentioned, to cut down that tree that's causing the challenges. So just, yeah, not really a solution, but it's it's a possible way that could be addressed.
Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone. For, one last question, please.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I think just overall with the presentation, I'd like to just maybe ask in regards to the threat intelligence. All right. So in terms of like ISMS, in regards to example like a platform as well is the M-Pesa for Vodafone. So back in my country, I think most of us we are using M-Pesa as well. So there are many people who have lost, been compromised. So looking at one of that, and the other one is like if you are looking into this ISM policy, like is a cyber, how we are able to tackle that in these situations.
It's a policy question. So it's a policy question, right? Like, is it about more how to tackle fraud within M-Pesa itself, or you want to take this? Or?
I'm not sure I will be the best to answer this question. In the assembly, maybe there are some greater specialists of fraud detection through data analysis and data collection and treatment. But this is a good question, actually. Now digitalisation enables better tracking of flows and detection of potential fraud, but it is also a new mean to evade and to avoid taxation and regulation. So yes, but unfortunately, maybe we are not. But we can discuss about that, maybe if you want it at the break. Okay. Thank you for your participation. It was a very nice panel. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you all for your question and for your attention. And let's have this break. Bye.